Fennel? Here. Mrs. Hoy is not here, and Mrs. Miller is not here. Dr. Sabo? Yes. Dr. Schauker?
Yes.
Please join me in saying the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I move to approve the minutes from our 6/26/24 meeting and 7/2/24 meeting. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
That was Robert. And will you please take the roll?
Mrs. Fennel?
Yes.
Dr. Sabo? Yes. Dr. Schauker?
Yes.
Jennifer, the superintendent's.
I thought that tonight, since in the June meeting, we had talked a little bit about cell phones, Mr. Doherty did, that he would share an update on how we're progressing with the work.
Just me to take the, where am I going for this?
You might as well
You
get to
they
the
can hear you, though, that's good.
180?
Or maybe up here if you want. Okay.
This way. Yeah, so at the last meeting, we did talk about cell phones. Currently, where we stand right now is I actually have 3 surveys in the works, one for parents, one for staff, one for students. The biggest problem I've had with developing these surveys is just want to make sure I'm asking the right questions. So one of the questions on there has to do with distractions. But I actually kind of want to dive deeper in that and see what exactly is it about the phone that's distracting me. Social media? Is it texting from friends? Is it YouTube? Is it games? So where are the distractions coming from? I do want to hear from our staff members on how often they're using cell phones in class as a learning tool. So I've got 3 of them developed. I kind of want to take it from here and work with Jared, Dr. Pizarski, and Jen Banker to kind of get them all wrapped up, and then we can get them out to the community, out to staff and students. And
Did you hear anything? I know you were looking at other districts, and did you get anything surprising or interesting back?
Nothing exciting, nothing unique. A lot of people using the pouches, and a lot of people going to just banning them flat out.
Okay.
I haven't really found any happy medium.
No idea.
No, but again, that's, as we looked at the surveys, that was one of the things that I didn't like, is the surveys I did get copies of, nobody got any farther than the surface, right? It was just, are they a distraction, yes or no? How often are they a distraction? We didn't get into the why. So, kind of went down that road more than anything else.
And I don't know, Jennifer, maybe you do. I think the social media piece is so tricky, right? Because everyone's talking about social media too,
Sure.
but that's not during the school, might be during the school day.
Might be, but again, part of the reason why I want to ask the question is because I want to understand the problem better before we just, attempt to solve it. It'd be a whole lot better if we knew exactly what's causing those distractions before we.
Yeah, and do you guys think that's great? Do you guys have a target date for when you think you might want to get these out?
We meet again with the principals, the 1st of August, and so we also were reviewing our revised policy, if you will, in their handbooks with them to talk about what already exists, how do we enforce what already exists, are we consistent, what does that vertical alignment look like, how is it different at the intermediate school versus the middle school versus the high school, is it different? So those conversations just started, probably like May, June, probably even May, so they're working through those pieces as well, so we'll probably have a better feel, because the principals will need to look at the surveys once in draft form to make sure that they're asking their input for what they need for the building. Because there may be some great specific things that we would want to put in there so that we're getting the right target audience, because there may need to be some variation in what we do to best serve our students.
Yeah, I think that's great, and we want to make sure we're looking at the date and we're not caught up in people being overwhelmed with emails right back to school. So it won't be before our next board meeting, because I'd like to be able to push out and let people know it's coming.
I don't think it will be before August 7th, but we should be able to announce something August 7th, more of a timeline.
Yeah.
We just really want to make sure that it's right. I think sometimes surveys, and Mike said it very well, are very surface level, and the nice thing that we've always done with our listen, learn procedure is to listen deeply and to really get to the core of what the issue is before we try to build a solution to a surface level problem. So we want to make sure that we really understand what is the cell phone issue, how is our policy not, or is it effective, and then what do we need to do to adjust to best serve our students, our families, our staff. And we just don't know the depth of that information yet.
And just to clarify, because I know you talked about this at the last meeting, but for people who didn't see that one, our policy's compliant. It's just a question of whether we want to go further, go deeper, you know, what we're hearing from parents, what we're hearing from teachers, you know, we're looking, as you said.
Yeah, and as we start the year, we're just going to enforce the policy that we do have while we work through all of this. The other thing I can say is that we're doing the surveys with SurveyMonkey. Again, I know we're a big Google district, but when it comes to looking at data, and we want to dive deep, I like to use SurveyMonkey for that. So all of these are going to be SurveyMonkey instead of traditional Google form.
Okay, great, and then we'll make sure as board members, we push out and let people know to look for it, and we can try to get as high a response rate as we can. Great, thank you. You guys have any questions? No? Okay. Is that's all? Okay. Treasurer's report?
I was really excited about House Bill 920.
I know you were. I didn't want to get anybody too anxious before I started. All right, it's plugged in and it's not up.
Give it a second now.
Okay, so, just give you a little bit of background. I've heard some feedback. So we used to do very rigid financial reports. They were exactly the same every month. They were just kind of system-generated reports. We moved to an Excel, tried to add some graphs and charts just because people see information differently and try to hit, you know, all the different types of learners and listeners. And then we added the Spotlight about a year ago. So we started just kind of adding one additional thing onto the financial reports that was just diving deeper, a little bit deeper onto a particular topic. I've heard the feedback that that portion of it is more well-liked and we need to expand on that a little bit. And the financial reports that kind of tend to look the same from month to month, they're very predictable, which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. They're very predictable and we know what they're going to look like. So to kind of spend a little bit less time on that and expand on the Spotlight. So what I'm going to try out tonight is I'm doing the Spotlight at the top of the meeting and doing it more as a report and not necessarily part of the financial report that you're going to be approving. So this is more of a informational kind of educational piece. So you don't need to approve this, it's just information. And then I will still do the financial report that you have to approve, just like we normally do. I just will go a little bit quicker on that than I typically do, because I'm going to take my time right here. So there's been a lot of talk lately about taxes and millage and how House Bill 920 applies, and I know that I talk about it when we talk about 5-year forecasts, and I kind of explain it at a very high level, and I want to get a little bit deeper and try to expand our district's understanding of it. I know everybody sitting up here has an understanding of it, but I want to go a little bit deeper on that for you guys, and for anybody who wants to watch and learn a little bit more. So I'm going to start talking about that. So 920 is what we talk about when we talk about the fact that our revenues do not increase with inflation. So I say that all the time, that our revenues, our taxes stay flat and they don't go up as property values rise. They don't go up at the same rate. Our revenues do increase, and you see that when we look at that column chart that I put up there every month. You do see revenues increasing slightly, but not nearly at the rate that our property values are going up. So House Bill 920 is the reason for that. And so what it does is it takes the values and it reduces the millage as the values go up. And it keeps the district from collecting more money. So the reason for this is back in the 70s when inflation was really high, schools were getting very large increases as property values increased very significantly. They were getting large increases in revenue. And it was viewed as, an unvoted tax, because people's taxes were going up significantly. So House Bill 920 was passed, and the schools would not receive an increase in taxes without the taxpayers voting on it. So how it works is it takes, the county does all of this for us, they do all these calculations. As the property values rise, they take a reduction factor and apply it to that millage. And so then they charge a lower millage rate so that that voted levy yields the same amount that it yielded when that levy was passed. So that's about what I do typically when I'm talking about 5-year forecast or revenues. That's the extent we go.
Can you say that one more time?
We're gonna go a little bit deeper.
Say that one more time.
Say
About
one
the
more.
cap and about how it's just, one more time for how it's become.
So, okay, I'm gonna get way deeper on it, but yes. So, voted mills are passed at a certain millage amount. The dollar amount that that levy pulls in at that point in time stays the same forever. So as property values rise, the millage goes down so that that levy still collects the same dollar amount. So the example I have on here is to illustrate, suppose a district passed a levy in 1994 that generated $100. Very simple example, not at all realistic, but very simple example. It generated $100 in 1994. Today, 30 years later, that same levy still generates $100. So clearly we can't buy nearly as much with that $100 that we could in 1994. So this is why we have to keep coming back for levies, because we're getting the same amount of revenue on a levy that we got when it was passed. And as time goes by and inflation goes up, we're required to keep purchasing the same things to provide the same level of service to our community. Our revenue has to, at some point, catch up to those expenditures. That's why we haven't created, but House Bill 920 has created this cycle where schools are forced to go back to the voters every so many years. I'm going to demonstrate that a little bit deeper. But to really understand it, first you have to understand what a mill is. A mill is not $1 million. Say that again. A mill is not $1 million. A mill is how we express the tax rates. It's the word that was used. I wish they had a different word, but that's the word that we use. 1 mil equals 1/10% of assessed value. Assessed value, just because, to make it a little bit more complicated, assessed value is 35% of your actual valuation. So to figure out what a mill would be, you would take your property value, multiply that by 35% to get your assessed value, so you're only taxed on 35% of your property value. Then you divide that by 1,000 or multiply it by 1/10%. So on the example that's usually used when people go out and they're talking, like when you hear a levy committee go out and they're talking about, this levy is going to cost a taxpayer with a $100,000 home X dollars. This is what they're doing. They're using this calculation right here. I used 500,000 because I don't know if we have any homes, that are, most of our homes are closer to the 500. So I just used that because it's more realistic for our district. So 1 mil on a $500,000 home costs the taxpayer $175 when that levy is passed. As time goes by, that levy is still only going to bring $175 on a $500,000 home. Okay, so that's what a mill is. Now there are different types of millage or different portions of our millage. Inside millage, you're going to hear me talk about that a lot when I talk about our revenues, because the inside millage does actually grow with inflation. So as property values go up, the inside millage, we do actually see some growth on our revenue there. Now, the inside millage is the first 10 mills that are assessed on a property. The 10 mills are shared amongst all of the different entities that tax you. So if you remember a few months ago, I put up a chart, I pulled that slide here, that showed all the different people who can tax you. So that 10 mills has to be, is shared amongst all of these entities who assess a tax. The reason it's 10 mils is because the Ohio Constitution requires that voters approve any tax in excess of those 10 mils. So the inside is the 10 in total. Chagrin schools, our portion of the inside millage on any of our taxpayers, whether they live in Bentleyville, whether they live in Chagrin Falls Township or Chagrin Falls Village, or South Russell, our portion of the inside millage is 4.5 mils. So right here you can see that 3 mils is going to our general fund, and then 1.5 mils is going to our permanent improvement. Have you seen? Yeah, it is showing up there. Okay.
So of the 10 mils,
Of the 10 mils,
we get roughly a little less than half,
yes, we get a little less than half.
which is the inside millage amount, which is the actual, if people have an increase in their tax, that is what they're seeing. It's the inside millage going up.
Most of it, yes.
Okay.
There are some other fluctuations, and I'll explain in a couple minutes how that works. But the growth that we see overall is only on these 4.5 mils.
Okay.
There are other 2 types of millage here, and I'm gonna get to this, but keep that 4.5 in mind. The voted millage, so anything beyond 10 mils on a tax on a property, anybody now, and all of our entities are at 10 inside mils. So now, if anybody wants to levy an additional tax, it's gonna have to be voted. That's what we are talking about. We're talking about voted millage. So levies that get passed, whether it's for the school or for a fire levy or police levy or anything like that, that's voted millage. So for us, our voted millage is 115.3 mils. So this little gray box that I have here is an example, and I'm just trying to kind of put numbers to it and give you a little bit of a real world example. This is the residential agricultural for our district for tax year 23, collection year 24. So we collect taxes a year later. These numbers get assessed and all of this happens, and we get a report in January of each year. So I don't have the numbers for tax year 24, collection 25 yet. This is the current year that we're collecting. So our voted mills is 115.3. In addition, we have 3.77 mils of bond. That does get reduced by us. It doesn't get reduced by House Bill 920, but I'm going to show you in a minute a little bit more detail on this. I'm going to show you the actual report. But so this voted millage is the portion that House Bill 920 affects. So when I'm talking about House Bill 920, I'm talking about voted mills, which is, as you can see, the majority, 115.3 mills for us. House Bill 920 takes those mills and adjusts it down based on the property values. So if you add up our millage here that I've got, the inside mills, the 115 in voted mills in the general fund, and then the bond mills, we have 123.57. That's the total mills. We're not collecting 123 mills. We're collecting 49.14 mills. So this 115 here of this voted millage is adjusted down to an effective millage rate. So when after House Bill 920 applies the reduction factor and that millage is reduced down, that's what we refer to as effective millage. So when I talk about voted mills versus effective mills, that's what I'm talking about. Our effective mills, that 115.3, is reduced down on tax year 23, collection 24 to 40.87 mils. So we've approved 123, and we're only collecting total 49.14 mils. So of that 49 that we're actually collecting, that's the effective rate, that's the effective mills that are being assessed and applied to people's property values, and then that's what's being collected. The 4.5 is the inside mills, that's what's growing. So that's about 8% of what we actually get. So if our total revenue is this much of it down here is where we're actually going to see growth. From here to here is all going to stay flat. Make sense? You have a question?
I like how you looked at me, I see your question.
Well, because I can see your eyes.
That's why he actually looks at me and says, "Do you have a question?" Because I'm constantly trying to figure out how we can talk about this in percentages or some way other than mills so that it's easier to understand, because it's so confusing. And it's confusing because it's confusing for me. It's confusing. It's just that the vocabulary is confusing. So House Bill 920 freezes essentially the tax that we collect, even though people's property values go up.
Yes.
Okay, and this is where I drive Ashley crazy, but I'm doing it anyway, so pull me back from the edge if I go too far. That is roughly 90%, right, of what we collect
What we
is
collect,
not
yes.
inside millage, so that is frozen, right? So we do not collect more on the 90%. However, that 8%, or I'll say 10% for ease of numbers, does go up, and that gives us a little bit of an amount that floats with inflation. So when people see their taxes going up, that is that 10% of what we collect overall based on, so 90% is voted on.
Right.
And 10%, which is just kind of coincidental the way the numbers work out, that it's 10%. So then of that amount that the taxpayer sees as an increase, that doesn't all come to us, correct? We get roughly half of that. And that's, again, just a function of the way the numbers work out with the millage, and it just is coincidental that it's 4.8 or 4.9% and 48%. Okay. So is that correct?
The reason I don't like to refer to it in percentages is this slide right here. Because the percentage to somebody who lives in Bentleyville is
Right.
different than somebody who lives in the township, or somebody who lives in the village, or somebody who lives in Russell.
It's not accurate, I understand that.
Which is why, again, here I'm only talking about the residential agricultural because that's the majority of our tax base, and that's what when somebody is asking me a question and they're thinking about their own personal home, that's residential agriculture.
Right. It's not precise.
These rates that I'm pointing out in this village doesn't apply to businesses. It's even different for that. So it's trying to get at, the individual person, because when you're talking about it, you're thinking about your own home.
Right.
Everybody is.
Right.
And they're all different. So that's why I can't put a percentage out there. It's very rough, yes.
Right.
Of what we collect, 8% of it is inside. But then again, next year, as property values change, this effective mills is gonna be a different number.
Right.
It changes every year.
Right.
So,
And so why would someone, just within the last couple of weeks, the new assessments have come out for Cuyahoga County. And some people's taxes went down.
Right.
Some people's taxes went up.
give me 2 slides.
Okay.
I will get there. Okay, so next slide. This is the same box that I had on the right side of the slide before. Now it's on the left, so this is just for reference. This report here that I have on the right is one example of the reports that the county puts out. So this one is the DTE 515 for which one did I pull? Chagrin Falls Township. So there's a different one of these for each. The villages will look different. South Russell's will look different. Each one will have a different one because they have different people assessing taxes on them. So what I've highlighted here for you in orange is the Chagrin portion of these taxes. So you can see like the top few are the county. Then you get down to us, everything that's highlighted in orange here. So you can see these first 2 lines, that's the 3 mills and the 1.5, that's our inside millage. So if you move over to the next column right here, you're gonna see a bunch of X's here on this reduction factor, because that inside millage, remember I told you, does not get reduced. There is no reduction factor. So the effective rate over here is still 3 and 1.5. The rest of these, as you look down, these are all levies that we have passed, that our taxpayers have approved. In 1976, we did not pass a 41.6 mill levy. This is the mills that was in effect when House Bill 920 went into effect. So they lumped all that together and said, okay, here's your 41.6 in 1976. Now they apply this reduction factor to it. And if you look over here, we're collecting 5 mills on that 41 mills. Moving down, then all of these are levies that we've passed. If you look at the bond, these 2 here, this 2005 bond, 2017 bond, there's a bunch of X's there again because there's no reduction factor applied to those. We're actually collecting the 1.2 and the 2.65. Now that will change from year to year. I adjust that down when I do my tax budget to the county as we pay off our taxes. So you'll see that number continue to go down slightly. But it's not because of House Bill 920, so there's no reduction factor on it. So here's the 123. If you added up all these numbers here, here's the 123.57 that we've approved. Effective rate of 49.10947 to be exact. So, much easier to look at over here in my little box that I've created, but here's where it's coming from. And this is all done at the county level, and this is done as a whole on our entire tax base. So as our whole tax base goes up, this reduction factor is calculated, and then it's applied to everybody's property. So that's why you're gonna see some fluctuations. I'm gonna show you exactly how that happens in a second here. But what I find really interesting is our 115.3 voted mills. Remember I told you that that's reduced down. If you added up all these effective rates, that's reduced down to 40.87 mills for tax year 23, collection 24. 1976, we had 41.6 mils. That's more than we're collecting right now. So, logically, if House Bill 920 didn't exist, we would not have needed a levy since 1976. My entire lifetime, this district would have never passed a levy. We wouldn't have needed to. We would not have needed to go back to voters. So, this is what, we keep talking about when we say that there's this levy cycle that is created by House Bill 920. It's not created by the district because we're spending more or we're buying more than we, had in the past. Our revenue doesn't keep up with inflation without doing this.
Well, and we've been talking about this a lot, and I think, we're not like talking about a levy or putting a levy on, so we're not, that's not at all where we are, what we're talking about. But because in strategic planning it became so apparent that how important and significant it is for our district, that it's really our residential real estate dollars that fund our schools.
Right.
We are unique as a district. There are not very many districts like us in the state because we get such a small percentage of our revenue from federal dollars and from state dollars. So I think it's really important to just try to keep explaining to people what's going on with their dollars because they're our schools, right? We're paying for our own schools. And that inflation piece is so interesting to me, and the fact that we created, people talk about the market and the market fixing things and the market is gonna stop. And what we did is we altered the market. Like if we didn't have House Bill 920, then people could look at what we're doing and say, oh, look, they're doing a really good job because they're growing under the rate of inflation. But because of House Bill 920, there's no way for people to measure whether we're under inflation or over inflation because that's taken that out of the equation and it's just capped it.
Yeah.
So, if we were going back for, it's hard to tell. We went back for levy, I don't know how many years ago it was. 20, yeah, so, that was because of that inflation piece being pushed onto the schools and taken out of, adjusting the market, sort of like a rent control would adjust the market.
And to your point about, there's no mechanism to see if we're within, inflation or not. I'm gonna prove you wrong in a little while. But for the average person, no, there's not. We can do, unless you sit down and actually do a calculation, which I've done.
Right.
And I'm gonna show you when I do my financial reports that you're actually going to approve tonight. I do have a new slide in there for you to show you how we've compared to inflation over the last 5 years. But yeah, overall, ours, it's just very interesting to me that it's pretty darn close to if House Bill 920 did exist, to right where we were. Now, I would have to go and do an analysis on every school district and see if that's the case, but for us, our effective mills is essentially what we had back then. So had House Bill 920 not existed, we would have not needed a levy since 1976.
And so what we've been talking about is how do we give our community a way to know whether we're doing a good job of being efficient with the tax dollars that they're entrusting to us to run the schools or not, right? And it's difficult to do because of House Bill 920, and it creates a mechanism that makes it more difficult for people to see, oh yeah, they're being efficient, they're under inflation, they're keeping the growth down. Or no, we're spending too much money. Now we have to look at, so this is very helpful, thank you.
And for our district as well, our taxes fluctuate more because we have the 2 counties. So if your entire district is in one county on the same reappraisal schedule, everybody moves together. Now, you're gonna have a little bit of fluctuation, but everybody moves essentially together. We don't have that. We have different appraisal years. So I'm gonna show you how that affects, a taxpayer. So when I'm talking about 920, I'm talking about the reduction factor. Remember that reduction factor is applied to the entire tax base as a whole. So it takes our entire tax base, calculates it, and then applies it to every individual property. So that's why you see fluctuations. I'm going to illustrate it here. So this is an imaginary school district with only 4 taxpayers. Mr. Miller, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Brown, and Mrs. Robinson. They each have a home valued at $100,000. So the first column here is the first year, and then we're going to talk about the next column, and that'll be the second year. But the first year, so these shorter columns here, they each have a $100,000 home. Total valuation in the district of $400,000. 25 mills assessed, and a school district is collecting $3,500 on that 25 mills. Every single one of them is paying $875. They're all paying the same amount. Reappraisal year happens, and everybody gets an increase of 50%. So now they all have homes worth $150,000. They all went up at the same rate. Valuation for the school district went from $400,000 to $600,000. We had a 50% increase in our property valuation. County is going to take that and look at it and say, okay, on those 25 mills, you can collect $3,500 still. So we're going to adjust those mills down. So we're going to adjust those mills down to 16.67. Apply that 16.67 to each one of these property values, and look, now they're all still paying $875. They're still paying exactly the same amount of tax. So this is what I'm talking about when I say property taxes don't go up with inflation. So on those voted mills, that's mills and millage together. On those voted mills, it does go up. And this shows you here, 50% increase. If every single person had a 50% increase, nobody's taxes would rise on those 25 mills. Now on the 4.5 inside mills, it would go up. But
Which is what people are seeing now when their tax bill's going up.
Right.
On the inside mills.
Right, but you're not going to see a 50% increase on your taxes.
Correct.
Okay, so in reality, this doesn't happen, especially in a district where reappraisals are in different years. So last year, Geauga had a huge increase, Cuyahoga didn't. This year, Cuyahoga has a huge increase, Geauga didn't. Here's what's going to happen. So starting out with the exact same situation, in the first year, all 4 of them have a $100,000 home. $400,000 value, 25 mills, district's collecting $3,500, each paying $875. Reappraisal comes. Total valuation increases to $660,000. Mr. Miller had a 100% increase. He went from $100,000 to $200,000. Mrs. Smith went from $100,000 to $180,000. Mr. Brown went from $100,000 to $140,000, and Mrs. Robinson went from $100,000 to $120,000. So everybody increased. Total those up, and you get $660,000. So to the school district, the valuation went from $400,000 to $660,000. County's going to take that $660,000 and say, okay, school district, you can collect $3,500 still. We're going to adjust that millage down, adjust the millage. Millage gets adjusted down to 15.15 mils. Apply that 15.15 now to individual property values, and now they're all paying different taxes. They're paying the same millage rate, but now because their values are different, Mr. Miller had an increase from $875 to $1,061. Mrs. Smith went up from $875 to $955. Mr. Brown, his property value went from $100,000 to $160,000. He had a 60% increase on his property value, but he's going to see a decrease in his taxes because his increase is less than the average. The average increase here is 65. If you added up these 4, their average increase is 65%. So anybody over 65% is going to see an increase in their taxes. Anybody under 65% is going to see a decrease. So that's why a lot of people, and specifically Cuyahoga, opened up their tax bills this year and they saw a decrease because Geauga had an increase. So now, next year, Cuyahoga's going to see a big increase. Geauga's likely going to come down overall. Obviously, that doesn't apply to every single taxpayer because of how your property values change. But in general, it doesn't just apply as a whole for us, because we have such fluctuations in our county, so it's even hard, it's hard for every school, don't get me wrong. But for a school like ours, it's even harder, and it adds another layer of complication. So anyway, going back to my examples here, Mr. Brown and Mrs. Robinson both had significant increases, but their taxes went down. So, and this is just basic, a very simple example. It's sort of extreme. Mr. Miller's property doubled in value. But just to kind of illustrate how what you're saying, people are asking you, some people's go up, some people's go down. This is why. Because the rates are assessed as a whole and then apply to each individual property. I just muddy the waters even more, or?
You did a good job.
No, I think that's helpful.
If you want a job in teaching, I hear there's.
Definitely not.
And just to, so the voted so when we're talking about the tax increase, we're talking about not the voted millage, but the inside millage.
Overall,
And
yes.
Yes, but then
But
of
an
course,
individual could see an increase
because of this.
if you're Mr. Miller or Mrs. Smith, because your increase was higher than the average increase for the overall district.
Okay,
So if the whole district only went up 10%, which could be 20 in Cuyahoga and 0 in Geauga, that would be an average of 10 if it's 50-50, which it's not, but if it was, you could have a 15% increase, you're gonna see an increase. You could have an 8% increase on your property valuation and see a decrease in your taxes because you're lower than the average.
thank you. Any questions? Yes, okay.
It was more of a floodlight than a spotlight, but
Thank you, Ashley, those are helpful. Okay, do we have anybody signed up for public participation?
I have not heard from anybody. Is there anybody over there? No.
Okay. And that would be public participation for agenda items. Okay. So on our consent agenda, Jennifer, do you, I'm just gonna take it, I'm just taking a motion here for all of them, right? Ashley?
Yes.
Okay, so I move to approve consent items 5.02 through 5.04. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ashley, want to take the roll?
Dr. Sabo? Yes. Dr. Schauber?
Yes.
Mrs. Bell?
Yes. Okay, Jennifer, do you want to walk us through the superintendent recommendation?
So we'll need a motion for 6.01 for the science of reading professional development requirements and stipend approval. This is to ensure that our teachers who complete the science of reading requirements can receive their stipend. That way we also don't have to approve each teacher individually. This allows us to pay based on them turning in completion of work.
So I move to approve superintendent recommendation item 6.01. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ashley?
Dr. Schauber?
Yes.
Mrs. Bell?
Yes.
Dr. Sabo? Yes.
The next one would be 6.02, which is certified personnel contracts, and this would be for building substitute teacher.
I move to approve agenda item 6.02. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ashley, want to take the roll?
Mrs. Bell?
Yes.
Dr. Sabo? Yes. Dr. Schauber?
Yes.
6.03 is for additional hours for certified personnel. This would be for things like curriculum development, professional development, anything that they would need to do for the start of school.
I move to approve agenda item 6.03. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ashley?
Dr. Sabo? Yes. Dr. Schauber?
Yes.
Mrs. Bell? Yes.
6.04 is for certified personnel also, and that's to approve the additional 6 class stipend. That's part of our agreement, our negotiated agreement, that if you teach 6 classes, that you would receive an additional stipend, and those are the teachers that are listed.
I move to approve agenda item 6.04. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ashley?
Dr. Schauber?
Yes.
Mrs. Bell?
Yes.
Dr. Sabo? Yes.
6.05 would be our classified personnel contracts, you can see there's some support aids. I will tell you, we do have a few more positions open, so if there's anyone interested in applying for some of the classified personnel positions, they'll want to check the website, please.
I move to approve agenda item 6.05. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ashley?
Mrs. Bennett?
Yes.
Dr. Sabo?
Yes.
Dr. Schulberg?
Yes.
6.06 would be for a classified personnel resignation.
I move to approve agenda item 6.06. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Ashley?
Dr. Sabo?
Yes.
Dr. Schulberg?
Yes.
Mrs. Bennett?
Yes.
And the last one is 6.07. This is an application for a student enrichment activity supplemental. So just to kind of clarify this, because I know these are a little confusing, we have supplemental contracts that are approved in our CFEA negotiated agreement. That's our teacher contract. Then sometimes we pilot different clubs or programs to see, will this be something that would turn into a supplemental for our students? Mr. Howe, the intermediate school, had one of these enrichment programs that he wanted to change. So he did an application to try a new program. This one will actually be using our, essentially what is, I would call like the intermediate school makerspace innovation center, and utilizing that teacher, which aligns to what we're doing 7-12.
I move to approve agenda item 6.07. And a second.
I'll second.
Ashley?
Dr. Schulberg?
Yes.
Mrs. Bennett?
Yes.
Dr. Sabo?
Yes.
Ashley, you want to walk us through the treasurer recommendation?
Absolutely. Item 7.01 is equipment disposal. I don't have the form pulled up, but it's athletic equipment. I think it's volleyball. Yeah. So I'm recommending your approval.
I move to approve agenda item or treasurer's recommendation 7.01. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ashley?
Mrs. Bennett?
Yes.
Dr. Sabo?
Yes.
Dr. Schulberg?
Yes.
Item 7.02 is donations. We have $1,489 from the Gurney Preschool parents from a lemonade standoff event that they held. Recommending your approval.
I move to approve agenda item 7.02. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Dr. Sabo?
Yes.
Dr. Schulberg?
Yes.
Mrs. Bennett?
Yes.
Okay, item 7.03 is the monthly financial reports. After a motion and second, I'll go through them.
Okay, I move to approve the monthly financial reports. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Much quicker than normal. So this is for the month of June, which is the end of the fiscal year. So really all that matters is this last column here, fiscal year to date. Revenue of 38.9 million, expenditures of 36.3, surplus of 2.5, almost 2.6, and ending cash of 21.5. General fund revenue, this is just the breakdown showing how reliant we are on our property taxes. 71.26% comes from real estate. 4.86 is the public utility, which is also taxes, and then 7.83 is the property tax allocation. This is the reimbursement from the state on those homestead rollback items. And then these right here, these smaller portions here, this is the amount that we get from the state. Not a ton. Yeah, unrestricted grants and aid, that's mostly our foundation revenue. And then restricted grants and aid is items that come through the foundation, but they're restricted to specific expenditures.
How much did ESSER money bend this graph? I mean, are we back to normal and?
You know, it honestly didn't bend the general fund too much. We use so much of it for our HVAC improvements. You know, really helped our PI fund. But didn't affect the general fund too much. We did, it's not that it didn't affect it at all, but the majority of it was out of PI.
Okay, so that's, I was noticing our PI fund is up, and that's why we had the ESSER money.
Yeah, we also have a lot of very large projects going on right now. So you're gonna see it go down really quickly. There's some big purchase orders out there, but they're, you know, the cash is sitting there right now, but once those get paid, they're gonna be very large checks.
Okay.
General fund revenue, so here you can see revenue does go slightly up as this is our inside millage and our new construction that we just talked about. then if this didn't have this increase in the advances back, it would have been 37 million. It's really the number you should be looking at. I think next year I'm gonna take advances out of all of my revenue discussions, so it just muddies the water. Expenditures, the breakdown, clearly we spend most of our money on our people to educate our students on our salaries, wages, and benefits. I think that's known. A lot of times we get, suggestions from people to, tighten your belt, stop buying so much stuff. Supplies, materials, if you look here, is 2.2% of what we spend our money on, so not a whole lot. Capital outlays and equipment, 1.45%. This is a trend of our expenditures. First 2 years we went down a little bit. This is since 2019. Orange is the current year. Okay, so this is the graph that I was alluded to a little bit ago, talking about comparing our expenditures to inflation rates. So if you look at these columns here, and this is our overall expenditures, these are going to correlate, or not correlate, they're going to be exactly what these orange columns are here. So this is our actual expenditures. The scale is different just because I want to show you the variance. So the scale here, we're starting at 30 million rather than 0. That's why it looks a little bit different. But if you're looking at these numbers, these are going to be exactly what they were. So these are our actual expenditures. So what I did here, I wanted to see, because I have gotten questions about how we are comparing to inflation overall. So what I did was I went and I found monthly average inflation rates, and I took all of those to come to a fiscal annual inflation rate, because when you're looking at inflation rates for a specific year, it's for a calendar year. We don't record our stuff on a calendar year, we record it on a fiscal year. So I took the monthly inflation rates, converted those to an annual inflation rate for our fiscal years, started here in 19, and said, okay, if our expenditures were 31.9, which they were, if we had gone with inflation and our expenditures had followed inflation, this gray column here is what our expenditures would have looked like had we followed inflation, had we gone exactly with what those inflation rates were. If you add up the difference, the variance between the actual and then what our projected would have been, for these 5 years here, the variance is more than $12 million. So I 100% understand your point about the average person can't just look at it and say, are we being inflation or not? Because we don't know, because we have to keep going back to the taxpayers, even if we are. This, though, I think proves that over the last 5 years, we definitely are beating inflation. Any questions on that? And then this cash balance, oops, every time I touch this, it's so sensitive. So our cash balance, that's our typical fluctuations, because this is where we get our taxes on these upswings here. Self-insurance fund, this is my favorite slide in this entire presentation because it looks exactly how I want it to. This has worked so great. It's done exactly what we wanted it to. This little dip here is where the month that we took the premium holiday and did not collect premiums, so the balance went down a little bit, which is what we wanted, and it's exactly where it should be. This is our financial summary report, all the balances in all of our individual funds, and where our money is held. That's it. Thank you. Any questions before I take the roll?
I think just to note that we're gonna keep trying to have these conversations and keep explaining, and if people are confused and want to call Ashley with a question or want to reach out to one of us with a question, we're more than happy to take it or direct you to somebody who can answer the question. But it's, I just think it's really, I don't know, maybe it's the mom in me that I really like for people to understand, like, that what we're doing with their money. Are there places we can be more efficient? Are there places we can spend less? Are there places where, and my first question is always, well, let's look at the inflationary gauge. Like, are we ahead of, are we doing a better job? And so that's great. That's a great slide, and thank you for doing that.
Yeah, and to your point about call me, please call me. I much prefer to sit down and talk to somebody and explain to them how it works, because the answer is very rarely just yes or no. And it's very rarely, even just a dollar amount. Because there's so many variables. So I like to explain things, I like to show it. If somebody wants to come in and sit down, even just the simple question, what's your general fund budget? Well, budget can mean a lot of things. Is it what we're expecting to spend? Is it the 5-year forecast amount? Is it the appropriation amount? Is it, there are so many variables. So I'm like a lawyer that my answer is always, it depends. So I really, absolutely, if somebody has questions, or if you wanted to see that example that I pulled was for the township, that was actually 1 page of a 2-page report. But if you want to see, you want me to help you find yours, I can absolutely do that. I know where they are. They're not necessarily our records. It wouldn't really be a public records request because it's not our records, counties, but I can show you where to find it. I can help you.
Yeah, there is a calculator, I think, on the county website too, that you can go to and put in what your taxes, what your appraised value was last year, what it is this year, and it gives you your tax increase.
I just wanted to say,
Or decrease.
mentioned that we have a lot of expenditures going on because we have a lot of projects happening. And that my son's at the rec camp this summer, so I've been going to the middle school every single day, and walking in today, the amount of compliments that I heard from parents about the paving and how incredible it's looking over there. I know we've been doing a really great job highlighting some of these projects on social media, but it looks unbelievable. And it was just fun to walk in and hear some of the compliments, because it really does. It looks really, really good. It's a great feeling.
And is the track, I think it's on,
Monday.
I'm sorry,
Monday.
Monday it's done?
No, Monday is
We're
Saturday.
starting.
Oh, so because it's like setting, so we're still.
That's what the word
on track
is,
for that
yeah.
August one, okay. So we'll have an update on that too. Great. So you want to take the roll?
I will. Dr. Schlemmer,
Yes.
Mrs. Benda,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo.
Yes.
Okay, anything, any other business? Nope. Do we have, so nobody, no more public participation, nobody for a non-agenda item, right? Nothing? Oh, okay, great. Okay, and Robert, do you want to make the motion since Lauren's here for executive session?
Yes. Where's the line?
It's 10.
All right, I make a motion to enter into executive session in accordance with Ohio Revised Code 121.22 for the sole purpose of the consideration of the following matters. To consider one or more as applicable employment and compensation of a public employee or official.
And I'll second. Ashley, you want to take the roll?
Mrs. Benda,
Yes.
Dr. Sabo,
Yes.
Dr. Schlemmer.
Yes.
And we will not be taking action after executive session. And our next meeting is soon, right? It's August.
7, and all the new hires and their families will be here. So maybe we could even do a little welcome, maybe around 6:45 before the meeting, like come a little early. We're doing our student.
Great. And are we here or?
We are here.
Here again, so we're here because of the air conditioning work, so we're here again. Okay, great.